Good morning and welcome to the Point. There are just a few days left in the Michigan State legislative session this year, 2, maybe 3 days, and there are still a lot of things that haven't been done. Some of them just won't get done, and our guest this morning says in some cases he's all right with that. Senator Jim Ananich is the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. We sat down to talk with him. Senator, let's start talking about an issue that you've been very involved in because it doesn't hit close to home, it hits in your home, and that's the water problem that has been ongoing in Flint. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it has been resolved to some degree because the water system has been shifted back over to the Detroit water feed, right?
That's correct. I mean, the way I look at it, that's correct. The way I look at it is I don't want to use the word resolve because there's still a number of issues that the public needs to be made aware of. Corrosion control, which is in the Detroit water, takes a time to coat the pipes. So if you did testing that was just recently done, the water still has lead in it. So people still need to be very careful, but it's in the process of being resolved. That's the way I like to use it. And the way I look at it now is we need to figure out what happened, what lapses in the system happened. So there needs to be a thorough investigation of how did this happen? How did these mistakes happen that led to such deadly consequence or potentially deadly consequences for citizens in my city, and then what are the recommendations going forward to make sure it never happens again and to fix the problem for the long haul, and that's what we're working on now.
So let's backtrack a little bit and give people the history because I know many of our viewers have heard of the problem, but because they were not maybe completely engaged. City of Flint was under an emergency manager order, and during that time period, they left the Detroit water system, is that right?
Yes. For years, we've been looking at, Genesee County has been looking at building its own pipeline. They've finally, in the process of doing that now, they broke ground, they're building it. They're calling it the Kirigandi Water Authority, or KWA. Flint opted to join the KWA, as well as a number of communities did along I-69 corridor, because we're going to be getting our own water from Lake Huron. I think it's a good project. I think it makes a lot of sense. And in that process, the emergency manager, or we'll just say this because the investigation is still going on. From what I've seen, it looks as if the emergency manager broke away from Detroit and chose to use the Flint River water in the meantime. And on the surface, that wouldn't be a problem if they treated it in the proper way and used corrosion control. And for people that aren't familiar with this, I wasn't that familiar with this until this happened. Corrosion control is just basically phosphate. So you put phosphate in the water, it coats the pipes, and keeps lead, if they're lead pipes, from leaching into the water. It's a protective barrier that was not put in place in the Flint River water. And river water, naturally is more corrosive than lake water. Flint River water was much more corrosive than Lake Huron water. So it basically took off 10 to 15 years of corrosion control. It was on these pipes, and it did it in about a year and a half. So I think this is purely speculation, but that the switch happened. The Department of Environmental Quality thought that they were using corrosion control. When they found out they weren't, I think they just figured, well, hopefully by the time they get to the new pipeline, it won't matter. The new pipeline will have corrosion control in place, and everyone will be fine. But then when they found out that there was lead in the water, immediate action should have happened. And we need to find out how individuals in an agency can determine that protecting their own reputation or protecting their jobs is more important than protecting children and families. And that's unfortunately what happened. So that's kind of the situation where we're at right now.
What about those children? What about people, because we know that kind of contamination can disproportionately affect younger, smaller bodies.
Yeah.
So what are the procedures or protocols now for people whose children were drinking that water, who've been exposed to that water going forward?
Well, one of the unfortunate parts is unless you were tested during that time period, we almost have to assume every child was exposed to it because the half-life or the amount of time that lead stays in the bloodstream is about 2 to 3 weeks. It stays in the system forever. It's done its damage once you've consumed it. So if you're testing now, the only purpose of testing now would be to see if people are continuing to be exposed. Because if the lead levels will start to go down in blood, each test will have less, which is what you want to see happen. But that does not mean that families were not exposed. So from my understanding, from what I've been reading and talking to folks, nutrition, healthy foods can have a major impact in mitigating the problems of lead and getting, it's there. The damage has been done, but you can mitigate the problem and make sure that the kids that were exposed can lead perfectly normal lives and exceed and succeed just like anyone else can. But when you have a city like Flint where there's food deserts and access to healthy food isn't something that's easy, we're going to need help with that. And I think there's some ways to do it, a number of different ways, whether it's natural food delivery, whether it's trying to find ways to open up more healthy food options, whether it's convenience stores that are expanded or grocery stores, continuing the double up food bucks programs at farmers markets. But we're going to really have to do what we can to make sure that kids have more access to that, because that's, we're going to see more and more advancements as we go forward, and some of these kids you may not see the damage till 5, 10, 15 years from now. But if we start working on it now, we can actually make sure that when they're older, that they're successful.
It's a two-tier track that we want to continue to follow. One is the investigation that you talked about into exactly how and why all of this happened, and then what happens to the people who were exposed going forward. But if that is a difficult moment for the city of Flint, we have known for 10 years about the Kalamazoo Promise. Recently on this program, we talked about the Muskegon Promise, and now there is a Flint Promise. Talk to me about that and how that is coming into an area that has certainly seen its share of economic strife. Not that the entire state hasn't, but because of the auto industry and the way it's played out in Flint, this promise holds a fair amount of promise for the city of Flint.
No question about it. I mean, I think disproportionately have seen, we were at one point in time when the auto industry was really thriving and there was 80,000 jobs in Flint and Genesee County. I mean, we were seeing economic boom. When those jobs left, we've seen a steady decline. So we think, and I think that this promise, which basically, once it's fully operational, would provide students in Flint, living in Flint, that graduate, access to hopefully we can do it in a way that gets all 4 years covered at a university or community college in Michigan. When I was on the city council 8 years ago, I passed an ordinance to allow us to start one, because basically when they passed a law using Kalamazoo as the example, they said the first 10 will be eligible for promise zones. I thought it was worth us getting in the pipeline. It's usually done by a school district, but cities could do it as well. So I wanted to make sure we applied. We ended up around 13 or 14, which means we weren't eligible for the first wave. Last year when I was on Economic Development Committee, we toured the Muskegon Promise, we toured the Baldwin Promise, and found a lot of bipartisan support for it. So this is a tool to help make college more affordable. And I'm working with Senator Jeff Hansen from Muskegon. It's a two-bill package that we're working to expand that from the 10 to the 15, and hopefully, this will bear fruit for kids in Flint.
There is another big issue that Senator Hansen is also working on, and I'm sure you have some interest, and that's Detroit Public Schools. The governor has said that over the next 10 years, $715 million, something like that, needs to be put into that school system. It is not dissimilar, it sounds like to me, from the auto bailout to some degree. You're trying to do away with the toxic debt and get an influx of cash to build this up. When I talked to the senator, he had not introduced those bills, and he was still working on that process. What's your take on where you're going with DPS? Because we don't, at least my impression is you're not going to deal with it before next year.
No, I think next year. I mean, there's a time that we have to get it done by, but this end of the year was sort of an artificial timeline, and I think it's important to get it done right as opposed to getting it done quickly. And Senator Hansen, I want to make sure I say this too, has done a really good job of including everybody in the process. He's worked with Democrats, he's worked with all the different interest groups, obviously with the administration. And I think if someone's going to be able to figure out a way to get a package that to get through next year, Jeff's the person to do it. It's a big lift, though. There's no question about it. We have to make sure that all students across Michigan have good access to education. Detroit, obviously, with this debt hanging around their neck, it's very difficult for them to invest in the kind of school system that every kid deserves. But we have to do it in a way that doesn't hurt every other school district in the state of Michigan. So it's a delicate balance that we have to walk. But I think if we sit down together and try to look at the end game is trying to find a solution that doesn't hurt individuals, but people may not love it, but it's actually gets to the problem, gets it resolved. I think we can get there. But we're still a ways from there, and hopefully we can keep working on it.
You've been around. You know how this state sometimes operates. There has been an east-west divide, or maybe better stated, a part of the east, rest of the state divide sometimes when it comes to jealousies, my word, over how we spend and where we spend.
Sure.
Have we gotten to a point where, as we look at Detroit, and we've certainly seen some progress made in Detroit, I don't think you can deny that.
No.
Are people more willing, I guess willing is the word, to try to help and support Detroit without that east-west attitude?
I've seen more of that. I don't know, and people use this as a catch-all for all the problems of the world. In Michigan, sometimes it's term limits, but I think in this case, where I think some of those long-term rivalries or whatever you want to call it don't seem to be there. When it's the one benefit of maybe having people being turned over a little more often is that they look at the issue a little bit more, less with that lens of this is the west side of the state versus southeast Michigan. So I've seen folks more willing to try to tackle these problems. Now, the way they want to do it isn't always the way I want to do it. And there's been times when I've supported it. For instance, the Grand Bargain I supported, and hopefully I'll be able to support something with the educational system in Detroit, because if we're ever going to turn these communities around, education has to be the number one priority. And doesn't have to be where your kid's learning and my kid doesn't. We should be able to lift all boats in this world. I mean, all kids deserve a good quality education no matter where they live.
When we come back, we'll talk more with Senator Ananich. To the point. Welcome back to the Point. As I pointed out at the top of the show, there are just a few days left in the legislative session, but there is still much to be done. We talked with the Democratic leader in the Senate, Senator Jim Ananich. We are in the final few days of the session for this year, and I have heard a couple of people say, and so I want to again reiterate, this is not like lame duck. Anything that isn't dealt with by the end of the year will simply carry over because the term continues until the end of next year. So the immediacy is not there as it is sometimes in lame duck, and that's where those bills will expire, and if they don't get acted on, will have to be reintroduced. So there are a couple of things. We talked about DPS. That's probably not going to happen until next year. Energy, which I think, as an observer, is every bit as big, if not bigger, than roads, and we'll get to roads here in a minute. But energy impacts everybody for the long term, and it's something that you can't escape.
Yeah.
Tell me what your take is on energy. You said you thought the House may kick their bill through, but that's not going to be the final version.
No way. I think that there's a tendency, at least since I've been in Lansing, to, if we just get it out of the chamber and just send it across the hall, so to speak, then we're done. For now, there's some magical thing about sending it to the next chamber. I've argued, and I think you've heard me talk about it here and other places, like you said, there's no timeline on this. Let's make sure we sit down and do it right, as opposed to just trying to get it off our plate, right? I mean, I think generally when you try to get something off your plate, it's messy, right? It's not the best way to do things. So, I'm hopeful that if it does come over, that Senator Knopf and my colleagues, both sides of the aisle, will take their time and get something that helps consumers, that makes it stable environment for businesses, because they have to know what their rates are going to be, because they're going to pass it on to us if they don't. That connects the two peninsulas. I think the UP and the lower Michigan need to have, the residents of the UP deserve to have reliable energy just like everybody else does. And find a solution that for the long term we can be proud of. The last energy packet's expiring. There's been some great successes in that. There's been other things that didn't work out as well. I think if we sit down together and get it done, it'll be a good piece of legislation. And I hope that's what happens.
Two big issues that I get a lot of pressure on from the advocates are choice and renewables. Mm-hmm. Those seem to be the areas where people get pretty invested. Some that call for a fully regulated utility system say that the choice is a bad idea, though a 10% choice option seems likely to remain in both of these bills, at least short term. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
I've never served on the Energy Committee, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert on it. Now, I study every issue before I vote on it, of course, but most things to me, it's usually either, not always, but sometimes it seems to work better if it's all the way in or all the way out. This idea of sort of you can't be half pregnant, right? I mean, either are or you're not. With energy with choice, I think you either offer people choice and have a fully unregulated market, which was obviously some concerns about that, or go back to a fully regulated market. So there's some certainty and understanding of what the rates are going to be. But it seems to be that the 10% that we're at now is sort of where we're going to stay, and I think that can be worked out in a way that still provides the sort of clarity for people going forward. And then renewables is also something that's obviously important to a lot of people. We've seen some investment in the state and other parts of the country on renewables. We've seen some successes on that, and what that's going to look like going forward will determine how successful I think we'll be for the next decade. And I think there'll be, I think some parts of the House plan will come over and stay, and other parts will be changed, and somewhat dramatically maybe even.
This next question is complex, not because I want it to be, but because it is. We started a number of weeks ago with Governor Snyder saying he wanted to pause immigration, refugees coming out of fleeing Syria and other war-torn areas in the Middle East. Despite what the constitutional interpretation of that might be, he was not alone. There were a lot of other governors across the country who said, wait a minute, we want to make sure these individuals coming in have been properly vetted. That was one issue. The presidential candidates, particularly Republican presidential candidates, jumped on the issue, some of them much louder than others. Then there was the incident in San Bernardino, which made people, in some cases, even more polarized. Where are we today on that process in a state that has historically seen a lot of immigration and a lot of Middle Eastern immigration?
No question. I guess that's sort of a good question. I think the number one goal for everyone should be keeping Americans safe. Right? I think everyone agrees on that. And I was disappointed. I will say I was disappointed in the governor's saying that. And the reason I say that is for a couple of reasons. One, when a person who knows and understands the value of immigration, especially if it's done right, which the governor does or claims to, putting the pause button allows for people, which I would call fringe comments like what presidential candidate Donald Trump's been saying, that hate-filled rhetoric, that the only purpose of it is to either benefit your political standing or to stoke fear in people. It's not what leaders should be doing, because the words that we say are important, and the actions that we take really matter. And I don't think that's what the governor wanted to do when he said that, but I think it gives credibility to people like Trump to say even the governors agree with me. And I don't think Governor Snyder and Mr. Trump could be farther apart on a lot of things, but when he doesn't stand up to rhetoric like that, I think it can fester. I'm hopeful that we can continue to have a thorough process that makes sure that when individuals come in this country, no matter where they're from, that their interest is coming for freedom, coming to make a better life, and that victims of terror, which these individuals are, they've been terrorized, and they want to get away from that terror. And if we're going to have a war on terror, if we decide that's the war we want to take on, which I think we should, victims of terror have to be welcomed and have to be open with open arms, or they're going to join the terrorists that hate us so much. And so I'm hopeful that we can continue with the process of thorough vetting that brings folks in here that want to be, that eventually want to be Americans themselves. And I'm hopeful that's what will happen in the coming weeks and months.
I can't promise you, but I think, at least in the short term, this is the last time I'm going to ask you about roads.
Okay, sounds good.
The roads package, at long last, has passed and been signed. It was done with mostly all Republican votes, and it was not to the liking of many Democrats. But it, at least at this moment, appears to be done. Mm-hmm. Good thing, bad thing?
Well, I hate to say this because, I think I try to choose my words carefully because I don't. I know I can get political points by bashing my colleagues on both chambers and different side of the aisle, but I don't think it leads to public policy decisions that are in the best interest of everyone. But I think it's a bad thing because now people think, okay, now we're done. We don't have to deal with it anymore. And the problem is the package is inadequate. It's not going to deal with the actual problem of fixing the roads. It doesn't get to the $1.2 billion we need anywhere near close enough. It adds a component of a tax cut at the same time. We're going to be raising taxes on other folks, but a tax cut that's down the road, that only goes if government grows. It's really kind of complex. I think the public was very clear in May. They want us to fix the roads. They want it to be done simply, and they wanted us to do it. And I feel like we had a list of things we had to do. We wanted to check the box so bad that we didn't care if we got it right. The cuts to the general fund, the only place you can make those cuts are to higher education, to local revenue sharing, which is police and fire, which is the services that I think citizens expect from state government. Democrats, Republicans, conservative, liberals have a different definition of what they want to see government doing. But I think there's certain things that everyone agrees are important, and that's, a good quality education, whether it's K through 12 or universities, that you can actually afford. They call the police, they want them to come. If they have a fire, their house or neighbors, they want the fire to come. And we can't keep cutting these services in order to balance the books of the state. And that's unfortunate what we did with the roads package. We could have done this right, and we should have done it in a bipartisan way. And I guess everyone has to blame, some to blame on that, myself included, because we should have kept fighting until we found a solution that worked for everybody, and we didn't. It's over with, and now we can move on to other things, but we didn't solve it. That's the main problem.
Moving on to other things, looking towards next year, not putting aside the fact that in the few days that are left that there'll be some things done, but I get the sense that there's not going to be anything particularly momentous done in these last few days of session.
Probably not.
What would you like to see done next year, understanding that it's a presidential election year and that will have some impact, and all 110 colleagues on the other end are either up for re-election or somebody else is running for that seat. So there is the cast, that kind of political air that starts to pump into the Capitol in an election year.
I think the public is crying out for people to work together. I think the reason there's appeal for rhetoric like Donald Trump's is because they've seen so much dysfunction, right? If you're going to have dysfunction, at least he's bold, right? That's probably the way people feel. But I think at their heart of hearts, they want to see us. They're paying our salaries. They pay taxes. They want to see solutions. And I think there's areas that we can come together on. I think there's workforce development issues. There's obviously some things that I think are more mainstream that maybe they think are more progressive or more liberal. I think that if you start, this is my philosophy, if you wake up on Monday morning and you're getting ready to go to work, and on a Friday at dinner time you feel like you're worse off than you were on Monday, that's a problem. Whether or not, I think we should do things like, I think we should be having some conversations about paid sick leave. I think we should have some conversations about making sure that people have quality education, whether it's in the K-12 system or whether it's apprenticeships. Not everyone has to go to college. I think we can do that together, and I think we can do it the right way. I want to see us investing in finding ways to make college more affordable. Now, that's a big federal issue for the most part, but I think we can do our part. We had the Michigan Education Trust Program when I was growing up that locked in rates. You can lock in the rates of what people are paying now. So when your kid goes to college, it's much more affordable than it would be if you waited. And I think we need to have more options like that. I think people want that. I think a lot of folks feel uncertainty. A lot of folks, are concerned that that at the end of the month that they have enough money to pay their bills. And I think I'm not suggesting that every answer to that is some big new government program. I don't believe that, but I do think that it's our responsibility to make sure we help take some of that stress away from people. And I think we can do it in a bipartisan way. That I think, and I'm hopeful that we will. We'll see. But I think it's difficult in an election year. But I think if we do those things in a bipartisan way, Democrats can't use them against Republicans, Republicans can't use them against Democrats. And I think that's, it's unfortunate we have to think that way, but it's the reality of the way things are, and hopefully we'll find some of those solutions. I think in the last term, a number of big issues we came together and worked on, and I don't think the Democrats lost or won because of that, or vice versa. I think people want to see solutions, and I'm hopeful that we'll find them.
Of course, any of the bills that are currently being considered in the legislature will not die at the end of the year. They can be considered next year, and many of them will. We'll be back with a final thought to the point. So the Michigan legislature only has a few more days in session this year. But as I pointed out a moment ago, anything that's being considered now can be carried over into next year. The possible exception is that big switch deal, the one that would put the data center in Kent County. That company says they want those tax breaks approved by the end of the year, and that's the thing we'll be watching most closely. Look for a very long day in Lansing on Tuesday, and we'll be back here next Sunday to tell you all about it. You join us.